Good afternoon and welcome to a Ski Institute visualization seminar. We are very happy and fortunate to have a special guest lecturer today, Bob Hazen, who is a senior staff scientist for the Geophysical Laboratory at the Carnegie Institution for Science. He's also the executive director of the Deep Carbon Observatory. I met Bob last year when I visited the Carnegie Institution for Science back in DC at their Broad Branch campus, and we had never met before, and walked in, and I was pleasantly surprised when one of his students or postdocs was saying, "Oh yes, I've been using Seg3D to do such and such, some of our software to do some of their work," and I had no idea about it, which is always a treat. But then in discussions with Bob, learning that he's really at the forefront of moving this mineralogy out of or from their traditional way of doing things into using visualization and data analysis. So it's very exciting because, I think some of us here have been at those times of transition where fields have gotten to a point where they have so much data, it's so complicated, they need new tools and ways to understand it. And Bob's group has started to experiment with visualization and data analysis and data science in order to do that. And so what he's going to tell us about today are those initial efforts of where, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and some of the initial efforts for visualization. And then this afternoon, he's going to meet with Alex after the talk, and then a group of visualization students from the design visualization lab, where we'll show him some examples of the kinds of things we're doing with different applications and see if there's some overlap and synergy. And the hope is that this could be the beginning of an interesting collaboration. And we're very fortunate to have Bob here because the main reason that he's at the University of Utah campus is because he's the university's Frontiers of Science lecture tomorrow evening at 6. I sent out an announcement to the seminar list, so if you have a chance to go, these are wonderful lectures and by big name scientists from around the world, and so we were able to sneak a little bit of Bob's time this afternoon. So please join me in welcoming Bob Hazen to the Ski Institute.
Thank you, Chris, and really it's just a thrill for me to be here. I'm very excited as coming to you as a mineralogist, someone who started in mineralogy when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old as a collector and have been passionate and fascinated by the world of minerals ever since in a whole variety of ways. But I've never been more excited than I have in the last year and a half when I started working with a powerful team of data scientists at RPI to think about mineralogy in a new way. I come to you a little bit with trepidation too, because I'm not a data scientist, and I know that each of you knows so much more about some of the things I'm going to talk about than I know myself. And what I'm really here, and the best kind of collaboration I find is to learn from other people with complementary expertise. What I'd like to do is give you a glimpse in this world of mineralogy and how we're thinking about, just in this very preliminary way, of using what we call large data, certainly nothing like some of the data sets you guys use, but to try to understand this. Now, I've been working with an incredible number of early career scientists. This is just a portion of the 50 or more people who are involved in this project right now, and I'll be showing some of their work today, particularly the work of my colleagues in the data science group of Peter Fox at RPI. And you can see some of the things we're doing on the website dtdi.carnegiescience.edu. This is something called the deep time data infrastructure. So mineralogy is one of the fields where you can assign ages to minerals going back 4.5 billion years. You can also do this for rocks, for geochemistry. You can do it for tectonic settings, that is, the various kinds of tectonic relationships on Earth's surface. You can do it for fossils, and you can also do it for some of the characteristics of evolving living systems, like the proteins that themselves have different evolutionary periods. And I'll sort of give you some of the context of this whole deep time effort. But most of my focus today will be on the mineral sciences, where we've been working on this in particular. And I want to do three things. I want to introduce you briefly mineral evolution, which looks at the variation of minerals through deep time. We want to look at mineral ecology, which is a new data-driven discovery effort which tries to predict minerals that have never been seen on Earth before, predict them using various kinds of analytics and visualizations. And finally, doing mineral network analysis, something brand new. The first paper just came out in August, and we're really excited about the potential of this because minerals are very large and complex interrelated systems, and never before people have been able to look at a group of minerals and see how they're related to each other in this higher dimensional space. So we'll come to that in a little bit. Now, in what we're doing here, we're trying to understand the diversity and distribution of minerals, but also fossils, the geochemical environments, and even the evolution of life through deep time on Earth. We're trying to compare different planets and moons. I'm on the Mars science team for the Curiosity mission. So we're collecting data on Mars and trying to fit that in and see how it compares and contrasts with Earth. And we really want to understand the co-evolving geosphere and biosphere. And I'd say this is the fundamental scientific driver. The recognition, which is really very recent, that the rocks and minerals we see on Earth's surface are strongly related to and co-evolve with the living systems, the microbes, and the multicellular organisms. Obviously, to do these, everything's dependent on deep time data resources. Let me just tell you about a couple in mineralogy that we use, and I think you'll be amused because these are the world standard databases. They're not all that large yet. We have, for example, rough.info/IMA. Rough is the internationally approved database of all approved mineral species. There are about 5,300 species right now. This lists them by name. It also, you can search by chemistry or by their structure. What we have been doing is adding an evolution feature. This is open access. You can click on that. And by brute force over the last 8 years, we've been adding data by data, a mineral, locality, and age. Now, we've also been doing some machine learning approaches, deep dive and snorkel to try to retrieve information, but it's still a very slow process. Most of this is done by undergraduates who take a mineralogy class at the University of Arizona, and I pay for them at an hourly wage out of my own pocket. I mean, this is how database is built. By the way, Rough, the name Rough comes from, any of you, Mike Scott, the first CEO of Apple. He was in the original garage. He got very wealthy, and he decided to fund this because he's fascinated by gemstones and he wanted to have an application. Rough, he said, it has to be called Rough. That's the name of Mike Scott's cat. So we really didn't like the idea of calling this Rough data, but that was the only way we could get the millions of dollars to get the whole data resource off the ground. Now, the other big mineral database is called mindat.org. It's crowdsourced by mineral collectors around the world. There's maybe 1,000 people who have access and can open this and go into it. It now contains information about 300,000 mineral localities around the world, obviously a very biased data set. For each of those localities, you can find a list of minerals that's found there. So there's about 1 million mineral locality pairs. That's growing rapidly, but still, it's not. We'd like it to be much larger, and that's something that's happening year by year. But the time is ripe for us to start exploring these. So the first thing I want to tell you about is mineral evolution. I'll talk about this a lot more tomorrow evening at my the Frontiers lecture. But the basic idea is the Earth's mineralogy has changed through time for a variety of causes, principally because of biology. We look at the diversity of mineral species through time. We look at the distribution of minerals. We look at the changes in their trace, minor, and major element compositions, because minerals can have a range of chemistry. And we also look at sizes and shapes of minerals through time. So there's a lot of different aspects of minerals. If you go to a museum, you look at a specimen, you'll never see an age associated with that specimen, which is kind of shocking to me, but that's something we're trying to add time to the field of mineralogy. So what we basically find is the minerals form through physical, chemical, and most surprisingly, biological properties. To give you a sense of why this was just this idea of using time as a variable is so new in mineralogy that people just didn't think about time until we first started talking about this, and this is less than 10 years ago. We can find no mention anywhere in the literature of what was the first mineral in the cosmos. I want you to think about that question because almost any field, the origins or the beginning or how things start is something people always talk about, but mineralogists never talked about it. So you have the Big Bang, It's 14 billion years, 13.8. Things were very hot. There were no minerals. And then you sort of cooled things down. You made hydrogen and helium, which are gases. There are no minerals. You formed the first generation of stars. In the first generation of stars, there's no minerals. So you keep saying, well, where and how in the cosmos did you first get a crystalline compound? A mineral is crystalline compound with a distinct structure and composition. That's what defines a species. 5,300 different combinations of structure and chemistry. What was the first one? So we began thinking about this, and the hint comes from what happens when a star explodes. So stars make all the chemical elements, they start cooling and expanding, and the question then is, when did it become cool enough with a high enough concentration of a crystal-forming element to make a mineral? Any guesses of what that first mineral might have been? Yes. Quartz is a great guess, but it turns out that it's a little lower temperature than the ones we find. The highest temperature mineral is diamond. Carbon-rich stars, it crystallizes out of the vapor, standard way of making diamond in industry. That's at 4,400 Kelvin, and then when you cool down a little bit more, the second one is graphite, which is another form of pure carbon, forms at 4,000. And there's about a dozen minerals we call the minerals that are found in those condensates. These are the things that build planets. So you have a dozen minerals to begin with. You have, and they form of these 10 abundant elements from stars. These are the essential elements. And so the basic question of mineral evolution is, how do you go from 10 essential elements, a dozen minerals, to 72 essential elements that you see today in more than 5,300 minerals? That's the mineral evolution story. So it begins in nebula. You have the dust comes together, electrostatic forces. You have dust bunnies in space. There are flash heating events in the nebula, like nebular lightning. This condenses down into little chondrules. The chondrules combine into various larger and larger planetesimals. And what we have left over today are the meteorites. The meteorites have 250 mineral species. So we've gone from 12 to 250. And those are the things that fall to Earth today. We call those stages 1 and 2. Stage 3 is when the planet itself starts forming, and you have new things like oceans, and you have hydrated minerals, you have ices, you have clay minerals, and so forth. Some of these bodies are very, very dry, like the Moon and Mercury, and you only have about 300 minerals on those. So if you think that's the end point, if you have an Earth-like planet where it's very wet and there's lots of vapor and volatiles coming out, you can form new things. We think that that's the end point of Mars, about 400, 420 mineral species maybe. But Earth has many, many more. So we have additional stages of mineral evolution, which I'll talk about a lot more tomorrow. Just very briefly, we go through a period where you form something called granite by melting the basalt crust. After that, that gets you up to 1,000, and then you have something called plate tectonics, where you have huge volumes of the crust and upper mantle, where you have reworking, you have heating of elements, you have fluids circulating. That gets you up to about 1,500 mineral species. So now we've gone from 12 to 250 to 400, 1,000, 1,500. And the thing is, these are chemical and physical processes only. That gets you to 1,500. But we have more than 5,000 species on Earth today, and this is one of the real discoveries and one of the reasons we need to use larger data techniques, because the key difference is life. Life forms minerals. So now we come to stage 6, which is the first period when microbes began precipitating new kinds of rocks, but not new minerals. The big game changer was photosynthesis, stage 7, when life began producing oxygen and the whole Earth became oxidized. That produced many, many new minerals, thousands of new minerals. And a lot of them are colorful. If you go to museums, almost all the colorful minerals you'll see are things that would not have formed before this oxygenation event. So minerals of copper, minerals of uranium, most of the minerals of nickel, and many, many other elements. These are minerals that just can't form until you have an oxygen-rich atmosphere. So they're not going to form on the moon. They're not going to form on Mercury and many other worlds. There's a stage where the oceans are becoming more oxidized. Don't get a lot of new minerals then. There's a period of global glaciation called stage 9, where the principal mineral at Earth's surface is ice. Ice is a mineral. The snow outside, that's a mineral that comes and goes transiently. And then stage 10 is when you start getting life on land, and also biomineralization, all kinds of new shells and teeth and bones and other sorts of things that formed. So that's kind of a very, very fast overview, qualitative overview of mineral evolution, an idea introduced 9 years ago. The trouble is it's a very qualitative story of our planet. And what we're really interested in is understanding in quantitative detail. So we began building that mineral evolution database. We focused in part on the first row transition elements, those 9 elements, which are extremely common in Earth's crust. They're very sensitive to oxygen, so they tell us something about that oxygenation of Earth's crust. They play very important roles in biology. In every one of our bodies, we have these elements doing essential chemical roles. And we have enough data to see some trends, and that's important as well. So what we have, this is a summary graph of the first row transition elements. We have 60,000 mineral locality age data. And this is still a very sparse data set. We'd like to have, many millions of data, but we're building this slowly. And what you see here are a few trends, which I want to try to just explain very briefly. One, you'll see episodicity. You'll see periods where there's essentially no mineralization. You'll also see changes in the average color. The colors tell us something about the oxidation reduction state of the elements, and you'll see a gradual oxygenation from that. One of the big trends here, the periodicity, arises primarily because of the supercontinent cycle. When the continents, they move across Earth's surface because of plate tectonics. And 5 times in Earth's history, the continents have come together, assembled into what's called one giant supercontinent. When that happens, when continents collide, you have very rich mineralization events. And furthermore, because you're forming mountain ranges, like the ones you see here just outside campus, you have cores of mineralization that are not weathered away, they're preserved. And so that's what we see. And so if you look at one of the very robust minerals that's occurred throughout mineral history, that's zircon. It's a very resistant zirconium silicate. It contains uranium, so you can date individual crystals. And this is a cottage industry now. Thousands and thousands of different crystals extracted from sands and sandstones all over Earth show 5 peaks of mineralization through time. And what you're seeing, it's a little hard to see this. This is today, this is modern times, and then going back 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion years. And you see those 5 peaks associated with 5 periods of supercontinent assembly. When we look at the transition elements, we see a very similar pattern. For any given billion-year period, the maximum always occurs underneath one of these periods of supercontinent assembly. There's a very interesting story here about Rodinia, which we're teasing out right now, but you see this very, very strong trend. You also see a change in redox state. So for example, manganese minerals can occur in a more reduced state with manganese in the 2+ form, or a more oxidized state with manganese in the 4+ form. And if you look through Earth history, this is work of Dan Hummer again, 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion years. Early on, there's a predominance of red, which indicates manganese 2+. You see the big pulse of manganese 4+ in more recent times. And there's lots of details like this. Remember, all these data are associated with localities, with other minerals associated with tectonic setting information, with paleobiology information. We can also plot these in various ways. Here's a skyline diagram that shows for each of those 9 transition elements, you can compare and contrast the different periods. And one of the things that excites me is, for centuries, when mineralogists have plotted data, it's always been on XY plots, throwing away almost all the data. We're starting to understand, and this is one of our very early diagrams. Here we're showing 4 attributes simultaneously, clearly showing multiple attributes of a system simultaneously, and being able to work with them interactively is an incredible opportunity that I'd like to pursue more, and I'm hoping to get feedback on those ideas. Okay, so here, for example, is the periodic table of the elements with all 72 mineral-forming elements, and every one of the elements has embedded in a PDF, so you can see for that particular element what's going on. This is a gold mine for mineralogists and geochemists who have tried to understand changes through Earth history. You now have enough data that we can start seeing very dramatic trends and compare different elements that show different kinds of trends. So that's one of the things we're doing. So that's mineral evolution. That's sort of one of the basic things that got us started. About 2.5 years ago, we realized that you can also look at minerals distribution in space. across Earth's surface. And we find that those distribution of minerals has a very distinctive pattern. In fact, the distribution of minerals is like the distribution of words in a book. This is a large number of rare event distribution where there are few words that are very common. A, and the, for example, in any manuscript in English are going to be common. But there are many, many rare words, and they define the diversity, the authorship. If you have an unsigned manuscript, you can, of course, use that kinds of lexical statistics to give a probability of who the author might be for that manuscript. We can use the exact same mathematics to look at minerals. And here's what it looks like. In this particular graph, on the horizontal scale is the exact number of localities at which a mineral has been reported in MinDat, that data set I showed you. And so there are a few minerals that occur at tens of thousands of localities, more that occur at thousands, even more that occur at hundreds. Diamond's a fairly common mineral with 700 localities. But the vast majority of mineral species are rare. And what you see here is that fully 8% of all those 5,300 mineral species are known from only 3 localities. And fully 22% of all minerals, including the one that I got named after me, it's occurs at Mono Lake. It's microbial poop, unfortunately. But there's one locality, and 22% of all mineral species, more than 1,000 mineral species, are only known from a single locality. So this is a kind of frequency distribution called an LNRE distribution. You can plot it this way, where here's the exact number of species known at 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. In black is the observation, in red is the LNRE model that we used in this case, called the GIGP model in this particular case. And what that allows you to do then, because this provides a statistical measure of the probability of minerals at localities, if you find the next mineral locality data point, you can predict the probability that it's a new species. And that lets you do something mineralogists have never been able to do before, make an accumulation curve. So here's an accumulation curve, very common in biology. Go to a forest and count the first plant and the second one and the third one, and you see how many species are missing after you've counted 10,000 or 20,000 plants. Here, at this point, we had 650,000 mineral locality counts. We had 4,937 minerals, and you can see it's extrapolating off into the future as you discover more things. We're now at about 1 million, and we're right on this curve, 5,300 mineral specimens, predicting about 1,500 mineral species are yet to be found. And furthermore, we can tell more details about exactly what those mineral species are. For example, here's carbon minerals, just looking at the carbon subset. And we see that there's 145 carbon mineral species yet to be discovered. And then we can say carbon plus oxygen, or carbon plus hydrogen, carbon minus sodium, and more statistics, and we can tell you exactly which kind of mineral they are. And we can also make predictions about where to go to look for them. And so as a result of this, we've started something very new. This is a paper that came out in 2016 about predicting undiscovered minerals. Never been done before, but this powerful analytical technique lets us do it. We started the Carbon Mineral Challenge. This is an international effort with mineralogists and mineral collectors around the world to discover new minerals. We're now up to, I think, 12 or 13 new species, almost 10% of the missing total that we predicted. Some of them are specific minerals that we predicted in the paper. They're tables of minerals. These are the ones we think are missing. We found some of those. Others we did not predict, and that's the nature of mineralogy. Here's tenunculite, for example. And the reason we did not predict it, I think, will be clear when I read you its occurrence. Tenunculite only exists when the excrement of a falcon bakes in the hot gases of a coal fire. Okay, we did not predict that. But we did predict that there'd be organic minerals, about 8 of them yet to be found. And so in that sense, we certainly predicted the same type. So this is an ongoing effort, and mineral ecology for the first time allows us to predict missing minerals. And we're now applying with the United States Geological Survey the same kinds of statistics to predict missing ore deposits. See if we can find our first billion-dollar copper mine, for example. That's something that's very exciting. The other thing that's really exciting from an astrobiology point of view is that this LNRE distribution that we see on Earth is not found, at least so far, on Mars or the Moon, other worlds. And so it is possible that you're actually seeing a biosignature. The large number of rare minerals may be a reflection of all the micro niches that biology creates at or near Earth's surface. So that's something we're exploring. Now, we are trying other new visualization techniques. Some of these will look very familiar and primitive to you. We're trying various kinds of chord diagrams and starburst diagrams. These are, of course, interactive. These are for cobalt minerals. And we have a group of minerals that are called primary ore minerals, and then the secondary weathering minerals. And we see trends in this diagram that have never been seen before. It's just impossible to keep thousands of localities and hundreds of minerals straight in your mind at any one time. A diagram like this gives us incredible, powerful ways of analyzing minerals that have not been done before. This is the use of clay diagrams, which you've certainly seen. In this case, again, cobalt minerals, primary minerals and secondary minerals, and the extent to which they coexist through time. So this is the oldest mineral going to the youngest, oldest to youngest, secondary and primary minerals, and then you see interaction. So there's a vast amount of information, again, shown visually in a very powerful, simple way we simply could never have analyzed just by looking at spreadsheets of data. Here's a new, this just came out in the last couple of weeks. Marshall Ma, who was at RPI and now is a professor at Idaho, and he worked with Dan Hummer on the distribution of minerals by elements. Now, I told you there are 72 mineral-forming elements out of the periodic table. And one of the interesting questions is some minerals, some elements occur together all the time. Silicon almost always occurs with oxygen in minerals. That's very highly correlated. Some elements almost never occur together. Silicon almost never occurs with sulfur, for example. And so the question Dan asked is, can we visualize a way of looking at triplets of elements? If you say all the minerals containing the element oxygen, what is the covariance of silicon with sulfur? And is there a rapid way we can analyze this? And so Marshall built a three-dimensional clay diagram. And basically, it's a 72 by 72 by 72 matrix in which each element is colored not by the frequency of coexistence, but by looking at the crustal abundance of the mineral or the element, crustal abundance of silicon, and said if you just had a random mixture of atoms everywhere, the probability of silicon coexisting with oxygen would be related to how abundant they are. And then this coloring scheme indicates how much above or below the random distribution you see in nature. And so this gives you a sense of how elements come together or how they stay separated. You can do all sorts of tricks with this. You can rotate, you can zoom in, you can make it transparent, you can pull out individual clay diagrams in any slice of this. It's just a really neat technique and allows us to explore element coexistence in a way that just simply couldn't have been done before. So that's the kind of new technique that we're working very closely with our data science colleagues on. Okay, so let me talk about mineral network analysis, because to me as a mineralogist, this is the most exciting discovery. I think this will transform our field. The problem with mineralogy is there are thousands of mineral species. They coexist in hundreds of thousands of localities. There are millions of mineral locality pairs. You can't keep all that straight. If you're trying to understand why minerals occur together or don't occur together, or what sort of geographic or tectonic or paleobiology context is important, all those data, it just becomes impossible for the human mind to think about it. But networks provide a very, very powerful way. So here's our research collaboration network that's worked on networks. And you've all seen these social networks. The idea, here's the paper that just came out in August. First author was Shauna Morrison, and half of the people you see here are data scientists, and half of them are people in earth science, so this is a real collaborative effort. And the idea is very simple. Each node in this case is a mineral species. When you have two mineral species that exist in the same place, that's an edge or a link, and you make a network. So here's a typical rock. If you've got a kitchen with a polished granite countertop, you've seen some of these minerals. And this is a group of minerals, quartz, orthoclase, albite, biotite, typically will be found in a polished granite countertop. So that is a click in the network. There are huge books and tables of these things. Johansson's petrography from the 1930s lists 5,000 different rocks in which there's a list of different minerals, and then the total amounts, what's present, what's absent. And so you can make a spreadsheet. And I just basically did this by hand This is 729 igneous rocks, 51 minerals. I just typed in everything, zeros and ones and so forth. And this then gives you a spreadsheet of coexisting minerals, which can be then converted into a network. So Ahmed Alish did this very first network. This one's based on another textbook. It's a very popular student petrology textbook, which lists 97 minerals. There are 97 different rock types in here. There are 37 different mineral species. And what you've basically done, minerals that commonly occur together will be close together. Minerals that occur rarely are going to be far apart. And every common rock type, there's granite, there's something called olivine basalt, there's nepheline, you see some of the minerals overlap. Indeed, this one simple diagram contains the entire field of igneous petrology, which is a college class. I also want to emphasize that with 37 minerals, this is a 36-dimensional space of coexisting minerals, each mineral coexisting with the other 36. You can manipulate this in all sorts of ways, but that's a very primitive example. We've done this with other kinds of visualization. Here's, I'm sure many of you are familiar with multidimensional scaling. So here, once again, two minerals that occur commonly together or closely associated will appear close together in this diagram. Things that never occur together are far apart. So you can render this in 3 dimensions. You can see the relationships, and you can study them. Now, this is from Johansen. This has 51 minerals, so this is 50-dimensional space reduced down to a 3-dimensional projection. You can also do this in 2 dimensions and start exploring some of the common and well-known attributes of igneous rocks. So, for example, one of the very, very well-known trends is called Bowen's reaction series. As you cool a magma from high temperature to low temperature, you will see a sequence of minerals from calcium-rich to sodium-rich feldspars. That's called the plagioclase trend. The iron magnesium minerals called the mafic trend, and then at cooler temperatures, the late stage trend. That's extremely well known, and it must be embedded in the network. And so here we are. There's the plagioclase trend. Here's the mafic trend. There's the late stage trend. That's Bowen's reaction series embedded in this 2-dimensional projection from much higher space. If we could see this in hyperdimensions, of course, it would be a much clearer. The trend has to be there. So there's actually a temperature axis running through this diagram, amongst other things. So this is the kind of power. We know in igneous petrology, we study what are called phase diagrams. Here's a very simple phase diagram. It probably took somebody 3 or 4 years of experiments to determine these relationships of what minerals coexist with what. It's like a mini network built in there, and it has to be present in the network diagram. The power of this is not that we're reproducing something we already know about igneous petrology, but the potential is there for any elemental system. And I'm talking about systems not just in 3 or 4 component systems, but in 10 or 12 component systems, which no experimentalist in his right mind would try to tackle. But the data is present in the natural world. If you have equilibrium assemblages, we can extract from these higher dimensional networks, we can extract the phase relations, perhaps even the thermochemical properties in an automated way just by looking at natural systems. It's an incredibly powerful and exciting idea. So this is one of the frontiers that we're looking at. Okay, so let's look at some force-directed graphs. Are most people familiar with these networks, force-directed graphs? I mean, is this like, okay, so force-directed graph, these are like a bunch of springs. For the igneous, we also, by the way, use all the network metrics, of which there are many, many, comparing and contrasting networks. I'm not going to get into that now. Of course, there's obviously a huge literature on this, but the analytics are very important for looking at subtle differences in the networks. So the node size in this case, there's 51 minerals here. And once again, we're looking at igneous rocks. The node size gives you how common that mineral is or how rare. The proximity tells you how often those 2 minerals occur together in the same rocks. We have colors in this particular case based on the different kinds. So in red, this is quartz and feldspars, which commonly occur together. Quartz rarely occurs with what are called the feldspathoids, shown in orange up here, so they're separated. Magnetite, it turns out, is an iron oxide that occurs with every igneous rock, and therefore the diameter of this network is only 2, because magnetite's connected to everything else. So there's this is a very dense network, typical. We can compare that with other worlds. What you see here is Earth, the moon, Vesta, the asteroid, where we have a bunch of information because of what are called HED meteorites that come from here, and there's Mars. So we can start comparing, and once again, as I said, it looks like Earth's network is fundamentally different from those of the other three worlds. We think this may reveal a biosignature. Still a lot of work to be done on that, but that's an exciting frontier. Let's look at a couple other force-directed graphs. This one is copper mineral network. It's less dense. It has greater centrality. There are a couple of centralized minerals. In this case, we've colored according to composition. So in red are minerals that have sulfur and no oxygen. Those are called sulfide minerals. In blue are minerals with oxygen but no sulfur. So that would include the oxides, carbonates, phosphates, other common minerals. In orange are minerals that include both oxygen and sulfur, or the sulfate minerals. And we see that they're highly segregated. You can do a cluster analysis on this and see very, very strong relationships for these different kinds of minerals. We can also find interesting things by looking at this. So this is, these force-directed graphs, you can manipulate them. Now, this is the mineral chalcopyrite. It's the most abundant copper mineral. It's connected to almost everything, so it really is centrally located and connected to all groups. Malachite is a common weathering mineral. It's also very common in copper deposits all over. So those are kind of expected, no big surprise. This is a big surprise. This is elemental or native copper. And native copper, it turns out, is connected almost completely to the oxides and sulfates, not to the sulfides. And for a mineralogist, that is a really big surprise. That's the kind of thing that came out of this, a discovery that we just didn't expect. And you could explore this if you're an expert in copper minerals. You could explore this network for days, because the amount of information is vast. And this is only the 243 most abundant copper minerals. There are hundreds of others, and we have also made the networks for the complete data set of all copper minerals. Here's a very different looking network to show you when you use network metrics. You can see very big contrast. This is a very sparse, low density network. It has a very high diameter of 6, the highest we've seen for a mineral network. What we see here, the diameter of these are directly proportional. The area of the circle is directly proportional to the number of occurrences that have been reported. And the big circle here, chromite, is the one that's by far the most common chromium mineral. We've also colored this, in this case, by paragenetic mode. That means how they formed. The orange ones are formed from a melt or a magma, igneous minerals. In blue, these are metamorphic. In green, these are weathering minerals. In tan, those are soil or chromate minerals. So you see different groups and a very, very high degree of clustering here by the paragenetic mode, which is not true of all other mineral groups that we've looked at. So there's chromite. That's the sort of the elephant in the room. Crocoite's one of the weathering minerals, and then you see when you manipulate this, that chromite just dominates everything and completely controls. It's linked to most of the other chromium minerals, and therefore has a very, very strong effect. When you look at the weathering mineral crocoite, what you're going to see here is that it's linked primarily to the other weathering minerals. And again, if you're a specialist in chromium minerals, it may look like playing a game or just like fun, which it is, admittedly, but you can learn a huge amount by this. And of course, every one of these nodes can be linked to all the metadata, to the tectonic settings, to the localities, to the other minerals, non-chromium minerals, and so forth. So you can link this to any amount of information you have on the mineral system. We can do this in 3 dimensions. Here's Dan Hummer, who I showed you before, who worked on manganese minerals. This is now all 500 manganese minerals in a 3-dimensional plot. And one of the really surprising things here is that you see this isolated group up here, which is primarily red. That's divalent manganese minerals that occur in what are called pegmatites. So these are manganese phosphate minerals that are sort of separated off. These red cluster here are manganese metamorphic minerals. When manganese gets subjected to high temperature and high pressure, these minerals form. These are all the sort of surface minerals. You see much more yellow in here, much more blue in this area, and this is because these are the weathering products, the near surface products, the kinds of things that are more familiar manganese minerals if you're a mineralogist. And when we look at these different kinds of minerals, they're very much contrasting. Now you can do this, I say, in 3D. This can be done with virtual reality glasses, by the way. So you can walk into the network. You can, point to specific nodes. You can manipulate them in that way. And the amount of information that is contained in a visualization at this point for a mineralogist is just mind-boggling. This was simply an impossible thing to visualize and understand. There's no way anyone would have known that there's this topology would have fallen out of this. I don't care if you've spent your entire life working on manganese minerals. You just simply do that. And you can zoom in and you can see what's some very specific. There's rhodochrosite, one of the commoner minerals that's very highly connected in the middle. So that's force-directed diagrams. We can also do bipartite network diagrams, and these are very important for mineralogy. This is a case where you have one set of nodes, which can be, for example, localities. This is the spread of SARS, I believe, and so these are individuals, I assume colored by male and female, and then the spread of the disease through airports or hospitals or whatever. That's the kind of thing it's often used for. In mineralogy, you can do the same thing, and here's a diagram of 404 carbon-bearing minerals. So this is a mind-boggling amount of information, but there's some really exciting new things. Especially if any of you are experts in network analysis, I think you're going to see some things here that have not been described before, at least to my knowledge, in the network literature. So in colors are mineral species, and there are 400 and some mineral species of carbon. In black are the localities where those carbon minerals exist. What you'll see is the most common carbon minerals shown by the largest circles, and also in this case, just for emphasis, also shown in red going through the color spectrum to the rarest minerals at the blue end of the spectrum. But these are mostly concentrated right here in the middle, where there are lots and lots of localities that are linked to them. The localities are also sized according to how many carbon minerals occur at that locality. And what you see here is that many, many localities that only have one or two minerals, they're linked down here because they're linked to the commonest minerals. But up at the top, there are localities, the largest black circles, which have many carbon minerals, and those are rare carbon minerals. So let's just take a look at how this works. There's calcite, a very common mineral, and malachite and other extremely common minerals. You get slightly rarer things like witherite, which is a barium mineral, and there's an extremely rare lanthanum mineral. You also see localities in black. There's Kola Peninsula, which has the second highest number of carbon-bearing minerals. That's in Russia. And in Canada, La Poudrette Quarry has the highest number. And you notice that they're associated with these clusters of unique minerals in each case. Now, the thing that's striking to me, and I've looked at a lot of literature on bipartite networks, we have never seen a bipartite network with this topology. That very striking U, and then this sort of blossoming of mineral species from extremely common to the rare ones on the outside. That's a really striking topology. And in fact, that topology is a large number of rare event distribution. You are seeing a different visualization of an LNRE distribution, which we never would have seen in this case. Of course, you can manipulate this in the standard ways and see how things are connected to each other and so forth. And you can go online. These are all on that dtdi.carnegiescience.edu website. You can do this yourself. Okay, now we can do this in 3 dimensions because we really want to know, is that U-shaped topology of localities, when you go to 3 dimensions, do you actually see an encased structure? And indeed you do. The gray circles now are the localities. And if you could go into, you can actually go in the bottom here through an opening and go inside to see the most abundant minerals. So that topology, if any of you, as I say, are experts in network analysis and theory, I'd love to find out more from you about how we probe this in higher dimensions and what exactly higher dimensions would mean. There is a topology here that just simply I have not seen before, and it's very, very exciting to see that. Okay, just I probably don't need to convince you. My fellow mineralogists sometimes look at this and say, wow, those sure are pretty pictures, but isn't it just a gimmick? Isn't it just like, you're just playing around? It's what's the point? what are you going to discover? And they're really resistant to this idea. And I think there are two things that are incredibly exciting to us, and this is where working closely with data scientists and also discovering new aspects of data science are part of what we want to do. It turns out networks and evolving systems embed all kinds of information that you don't put into the network when you design it. And the second thing is affinity analysis, which I'm sure some of you have done as well. So let's look again at the copper network. I mentioned that we just do this based on what minerals coexist with what minerals. There's very strong segregation by chemistry. And what that means is that running through this network and running through every one of the mineral networks you saw, there are compositional axes. From low oxygen fugacity to high oxygen fugacity. From low sulfur fugacity to high sulfur fugacity. They have to be there because minerals that form at low oxygen fugacity are not going to coexist with ones that form at high oxygen fugacity. So the network, even though we put no compositional information, has just an incredible quantity of compositional information there in terms of the thermochemical properties. And of course, we're dealing in a two-dimensional projection of 243 minerals, so there's much, much more information in higher dimensional analyses. Timelines. Now, it's intuitively obvious that you have a timeline in any evolving system involving fossils. I love trilobites. The specimens you see are all things that I've donated to the Smithsonian. You can go down and see the specimens. The most ancient trilobites, the Olenellids, are down at one end, then the Tychoperids, the Illinids, which came on the Ordovician period, and then you see them, the Phacopids, the more fancy Lycids, and at the very end, the Proetids, the very last of the trilobites. This is a network that's only based on which genera of trilobites coexist with each other, and the timeline is built into that. You can also see extinction events. Excuse me, yes? This is from the PaleoBio database, yes. So this is work done with our colleagues Andy Knoll and Drew Musenti at Harvard University. But there's an extinction here, there's an extinction here. We've done many PaleoBio networks now. We have a number of these out. We've actually discovered, see me later if you're interested, the most ancient mass extinction event in the Ediacaran by looking at all the coexisting Ediacaran fauna. And it turns out there's a mass extinction at 560 million years that has never been described before. So in minerals, now this is the same diagram you just saw, but the color here is by age. So the most ancient or the earliest occurrence of each mineral is recorded as a color through this color spectrum. These tend to be the most ancient ones, and the ones out here tend to be the most modern ones. There's a time axis running through here. Minerals are also an evolving system, not a system evolving by natural selection, Darwinian evolution, but it has its own set of timelines. But the thing that really amazed us is this applies to other kinds of networks. Now, this is work of Jana Bromberg, who's at Rutgers, a very important colleague of ours, and it shows 6,000 nodes. Each one represents a protein structure. In particular, a protein that does what are called oxidoreductase reactions, that is, an electron transfer reaction. The information contained in this is entirely based on the similarity or dissimilarity of the 20 angstrom volume around what's called the active site. Now, if you look at a protein, there's very typically a cluster, including metal atoms at the center. That's where the electron transfer gets done. And then there's a series of protein folds around that that sort of tunes the exact voltage gap. And what Jana Bromberg did is she took the protein database at Rutgers, did the similarity matrix for all of these proteins, and if two dots are close together, the structures are very similar. If they're far apart, they're very different. And then the lines represent proteins that have the same function. So two things can have the same function, but very different structure. So that's the only thing that went into this. It's the similarity of structures, then you put in the lines, and then after she did that, she colored it according to what are the most abundant metal in the active site. And what you see is that at one end, there's lots of iron-containing proteins. These are manganese-containing proteins. The copper ones are up there. Copper ones do a different set of things. And the amazing thing is that is the geochemical timeline. The ancient seas were rich in iron. And as oxygen developed, you had increasing availability of manganese, and only in the latest stage, copper. So there's a timeline running through this. There's no age information whatsoever. Proteins don't come with an age stamp on them. But we now think that we're going to be able to tease out the evolutionary ages of proteins from this kind of thing. And of course, doing it in a higher dimensional space, because, for example, within this group of iron-bearing proteins, there are many, many different subgroups that have their own evolutionary pathways, and that's the kind of subtlety that we're working on. One more example, something that I never would have thought had a time component. My good colleague at St. Petersburg Tech in Russia, Sergei Kravovichev, has been worrying about the information content of crystal structures. Every crystal structure can be reduced to a number of bits of information. And so there's simple structures and complex structures. He's divided them into 5 different groups, as shown up here, 0 to 20 bits, up to more than 1,000 bits. And we've colored them so that blue is the simplest structures, and then green, and then yellow. And while there's a lot of scatter in here, this is all 600 plus copper minerals now you're looking at. And although there's a lot of scatter, there is an absolute vector through this of reduced to greater complexity. And that's just a very profound thing. I think it has to do partly with the age. Older minerals tend to be simpler. They tend to be chemically simpler. And chemical simplicity translates into structural simplicity. So this vector may be very similar for age. It may have to do with chemistry. There may be all sorts of hidden, but no structural complexity information of any kind was used in making this network. And yet there is embedded in the network some new insights and information which we're only just beginning to explore. Finally, in the last couple of minutes, I want to talk about the latest thing that we're trying to do, and I'd love your feedback on this as well. I'm sure many or all of you have heard of market basket analysis. It's a branch of affinity analysis that's used to, say if you buy one product, what's the likelihood you're going to like some other product? I tried to buy Jonathan Lenine's astrobiology book on Amazon. There were only used copies. The cheapest one was $300. I didn't buy it, but within a second, they sent me this. And, here's their recommendations. And I don't know why Horgan's The End of War was recommended, but they have algorithms, as you know, correlations, positive correlations, based on, when you've given 1 to 5-star ratings, and they have billions of sales records, and they come up with this through affinity analysis. And what we argue is that the same math can be applied to finding new minerals. And the reason we say that is because if you look at minerals, you're more or less likely to find minerals at different localities. And so minerals either like each other a lot or they dislike each other a lot, and there's thousands of them, and there's hundreds of thousands of localities. And essentially, it's the same kind of relationship math. So we think the mineral networks are revealing some of these associations. We're beginning to do that affinity analysis. And so this is my ultimate vision of the future of mineralogy. And I think this is going to happen. So you put on your virtual reality glasses and you talk to the computer and say, computer, I want to study my favorite mineral. Say it's gillespite. That's one that I worked on, so I really like gillespite. It's pretty rare. And say, computer, show me where in the entire node of 5,300 interconnected minerals, where's gillespite, and you'll find it, and you'll be manipulated and say, show me pictures of famous specimens, show me pictures of famous localities, let me get a sense of gillespite, and what's the tectonic setting, tell me some other things about gillespite. Show me minerals that coexist with it, and you'll see those, and you'll see they'll highlight the links in the network, and you'll be able to see that. And then you just say, where should I go to find a new gillespite locality that's never been described before? And I am absolutely convinced the computer will tell us. Say there's an 80% probability that if you go to this place, you will find gillespite. And that can be translated in, there's an 80% chance you go to this locality, you'll find that $1 billion copper mine. This, I just feel like it's inevitable. I just see this as the future of our field. A field where it always used to be gold is where you find it, meaning that you go and you just search around, and if you're lucky enough to stumble on something and pick it up, then you get rich. I think there are other ways of getting rich, and it's all going to be based on big data, and it's you guys that are going to figure out how to do this. How soon? It's going to depend on creativity. It's going to depend on hard work, how many people, how much money we have to do this. We're working very, very hard to raise money. It's you know, a lot of work. The conclusions, I think, are pretty obvious. You know, you guys know that data is a powerful tool for making discoveries, and we're trying to apply it in new ways right now. I urge you, if you want to know more about what we're doing, go to our website where we have some of these networks you can explore, and we're trying to add more stuff every day. I want to thank my colleagues in Network who made a lot of this possible, and some of the funding agencies that support our work. And thank you very much.